The clerk noticed the crowd before he noticed the heat. He had opened the shutters of the record office at first light to draw a breeze through shelves of rolled papyrus and tablets, the contracts bound by twine and sealed with red wax. From the window, he could see the northern wall of the Temple Mount and the shoulder of the Antonia Tower. Usually the noise off the courts was steady, coin changing, animals, the murmur of prayer, but this morning a chant carried up the hill like the wind had chosen a side. The clerk pressed his palm to the marks on a tithe register and tried to keep his place as the chant turned into a roar, and men in traveling cloaks pushed through the outer courts, faces set, hands on knives wound with cords of wool. The day before, the captain of the temple, Eleazar, son of the high priest, had ordered that the daily sacrifice for the Roman emperor be stopped. It sounded like a small act, but it was a line drawn where everyone could see it. The city had been sliding toward a fight since the procurator squeezed bribes out of merchants and beat worshippers for effect. Now it was a fall. In the galleries, younger men called themselves Zealots and treated Eleazar's order as a key turned in a lock. Priests from old houses argued for patience and sent messengers to the king's palace to talk sense into anyone who would listen. The clerk kept writing names and sums because that was his work. The seal on the wall said the office kept the city's contracts, mortgages, loans, promissory notes, records of gifts and vows, and much of it passed through priestly hands. By noon, men armed from the barracks on the hill and men in plain coats from the upper market were crowding the same alleys and taking sides without speeches. Someone cut the cords of the money changers' pens. A guard towered over a tax kiosk and told the scribe at the table to leave. When the clerk stepped into the courtyard to see, a boy shouted that they were coming for the records. He didn't have time to ask which records. A forward edge of the crowd broke around the door like water, and a man with a scar over his brow told the clerk to stand aside. The first blows landed on the doorframe, not the lock, because anger aims for what it can reach. The zealots pushed past and poured into the rows. They did not take the tablets. They threw them. Wax and splinters hit the floor like hail. A jar of ink shattered, black on the ledger boards and the clerk's sandals. The men told him to leave. He said the documents kept peace between neighbors, that a city without proof is a city of shouting. A young man stared through him as if the words were smoke and tipped a brace of oil lamps onto a woven mat, then struck flint. Fire ran along the floor, hit dry wood, and rose. Smoke filled the room in a thin sheet first, and then a wall. A gust from the window fed it so fast, the clerk felt the hair on his arms crinkle. He backed out with his sleeve over his mouth and watched with others from the street as flame climbed the shelves and found the ceiling. Word spread that the records building was burning, and those who had argued for gentler measures could not get down the hill fast enough to stop it. By the time elders from the priestly families reached the door, the roof had started to collapse in bright squares, flakes of black paper lifting into the sky and spinning away like spent birds. The younger men shouted that the debts were gone and the poor were free. A shopkeeper laughed, then cried, because the paper that burned also held the proof of his dowry and the title to the shop itself. The clerk thought of the tithe rolls that set who owed what to the temple, and the accounts that showed who skimmed what from pilgrims, and how the fire didn't care which ink paid for a lamp and which paid for a robe. That night, sentries on the Antonia watched streaks of flame across the upper city as another crowd turned on the houses of the high priest's allies. One of the first to go belonged to Ananias, a man who had held power off and on for years, and whose name provoked more curses than blessings in the market. His courtyards burned bright as a beacon that said old rules no longer held. In the lanes, men ripped down shutters and fought for brass fittings to sell later. The temple guard could not stand in all these places at once, and many of them would not have tried if they could. Everyone knew who took bribes and who sold the seats at judgment. The burning of the records changed the neighborhood in a single afternoon. Moneylenders hid or ran. Debtors walked differently, shoulders up, glancing at no one. Some embraced the change because it was the first thing that felt like justice in a year of humiliation. Some cautioned that a city cannot live on ashes. The priests who had looked to Rome to enforce order found they had no lever left to pull in Jerusalem. The accounts that held favors and obligations had gone to smoke, and a generation's worth of control with them. Then the fight moved inward. The Zealots kept their post in the temple and set up their own courts with their own punishments. Old-line priests tried to outflank them by gathering men loyal to the city rather than to any party. One of those leaders, Ananus, son of Ananus, the same family that had ruled the courts and angered the crowds, organized a siege of the Zealot stronghold within the sacred courts. The site was wrong in every direction. Priests and temple captains facing other priests across stone laid to measure offerings. Ananus thought a show of firm hands would end the chaos. Instead, John of Gischala, a smooth talker who had slipped past rivals all year, played courier between sides and convinced the Zealots to invite help from the countryside. On a storm night, the help arrived. Thousands of Idumeans pounding at the gates, men who felt cheated by the leadership in the city and eager for a fight that looked like justice. The rulers hesitated, then locked the gates against them and set guards along the walls to let weather do its work. Lightning cracked over the valley. The Idumeans cut through a gatepost in the rain, spilled into the city, and made straight for the temple courts, where the Zealots opened a passage. In the morning light, the court stones ran slick. Ananus fell under blades in the inner precinct. Other priests died in their linen, and their murderers left their bodies unburied in places where even a stray coin could not be set down without a blessing. Men said the city had killed its own shepherds on the altar steps. After that, nothing normal could be put back. Factions turned the Holy Mount into a fort, cutting through house walls to make lanes for their runners, building scaffolds for lookouts on roofs meant for prayer. They minted coins that boasted of freedom while they beat confessions out of rivals in the vaulted rooms beneath the courts. The new rulers said they were burning out corruption, but their knives followed not law, but suspicion. If someone whispered that a treasury keeper kept more than his share, a tribunal appeared, and if a tablet showed his name near an enemy's, a cry of "collaborator" was enough to end his trial. The Romans came, as everyone knew they would. War changed the city's hunger into something harder. John's men held one set of courts, Eleazar's another, while Simon Bar Giora, a leader of toughs who promised bread to the common people and revenge on the rich, controlled the lower city. When food grew scarce, the factions fought over granaries rather than share them, and the people who had cheered the burning of paper now watched their storehouses open to anyone with a sword. A mother begged a watchman to let her pass with a basket, and was told that every basket belonged to the city. In the heat of summer, the old offense of priestly corruption seemed almost simple compared to the new offense of the city devouring itself. By the time siege engines groaned against the outer walls, the inner law had already failed. Stones crashed through porticos that had rung with psalms. Fires ran along cedar beams that carpenters had placed generations earlier. Soldiers pushed through smoke that smelled not only of wood and oil, but of papyrus, ink, and wax, the scent that had first risen from the record office at the start of the revolt. Somewhere in the wreckage, a former clerk might have remembered that day and understood too late what it meant to destroy the city's memory in order to punish the people who abused it. When silence finally fell over the ruined courts, nothing that had mattered to either side could be found where it belonged. The Zealots had proved the priests corrupt, and the priests had proved the Zealots reckless, and together they had left the city with no center to pull it back from the edge. Travelers who came after stood on the mount and tried to imagine how the crowds had once moved between the gates, how the smell of offerings and bread and oil had once covered the stink of politics. They picked up shards of blackened clay stamped with seals that no longer had meaning and set them back down because there was nowhere to take them. The story still gets told in rooms where people argue about the line between justice and ruin. Some say the burning of the archives was the one honest act in a year of lies, the match that took power out of hands that had stolen it. Others say it was the first cut of a knife that never stopped, the day the city learned to fight shadows while the enemy sharpened steel outside the walls. The clerk, whose ink-stained sandals black, would describe what he saw in plainer words. A room built to hold agreements going suddenly bright, names and sums floating up as ash, and the understanding that once a city forgets how to remember, anyone can write the next part any way they like. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.